Okay, here's the review preview for answers for the homework from 722 and 723. We kind of combine those together. So problem number 129 says find the equation for each graph below. So it's a sine curve. All of them are going to be sine curves. So this first one, the first thing you have to do is figure out where the starting point went. So we want to know that it starts at, and between 0 and pi over 2 is pi over 4. So that means we moved it over pi over 4. So if you notice, it still goes from 2 to 3, which is a shift of 1. So the amplitude didn't change, but now it moved up from 0 to 2. So we had a vertical shift of 2. So when we write the equation, it's going to be y equals the sine of x minus pi over 4, because I went, remember, opposite of what you see, minus pi over 4 plus 2 to show that it moved up 2. For B, the starting point of the sine curve is right here. Okay, so it moved negative pi over 2. So that means that when we start the equation, we're going to have sine of x plus pi over 2 to show that it moved in that direction. It went up a half because it went from 0, and now the starting point's at 1/2, so plus 0.5. And our amplitude is now 1.5, so it's up 1.5. So before we're going to put 1.5. And that would be our equation. Part C, there's a couple possibilities for our equation. So we can say it depends on where the curve starts. We can say the curve is starting right here, which means that it shifted to the left. Or we could say that the curve is actually starting right here, which means it shifted to the right. It still went up 2 because our midline's now at a 2. So I know, so my equation could either be sine of x plus 5 pi over 6 plus 2, or it could be y equals a negative sine of x minus pi over 6 plus 2. So for D, the same thing happens. I can either do it a couple different ways. So here are my points right here. This is my midline. So my midline's at -1. So my two possibilities for my equation are y equals 3 sine of x minus 2 pi over 3 minus 1, or y can equal a negative 3 sine of x plus pi over 3 minus 1. So it just depends on where your starting point is. 130, Claudia graphed y equals the cosine of theta and y equals the cosine of theta plus 360 on the same set of axes. She didn't see any difference in their graphs at all. Why not? It's because she moved her starting point a whole entire cycle over. So she's going to see the same thing in the other cycle. It's because if you add 360, you're going to get a full cycle. You will get a full cycle. So you just basically move that whole entire cycle over a whole cycle. Problem 134, change to graphing form. So the first thing we have to do is complete the square. So I'm going to subtract 13 from both sides. So I get negative 13 equals, I'm going to pull a negative 2 out. So I get x squared plus x over 2. And then I'm going to complete the square. So this is x squared. Divide x over 2 by 2, I get x over 4. So I have x plus 1/4. So I get 1 over 16. So I'm going to add 1/16, but I have to multiply that by -2. So -2 times 1/16 is -1/8. So I'm really subtracting 1/8 from this side. So I'm going to get negative 13 and 1/8 equals negative 2 x plus 1/4 squared. Add 13 and 1/8 over, so I get y equals a negative 2 x plus 1/4 squared plus 13 and 1/8. So I'm going to erase my little, where I figured out my completing the square part over here. Okay, for the next problem, I have y equals negative 3x squared minus 6x plus 12. So first thing I'm going to do is subtract 12 from both sides. So I get negative 12 equals, I'm going to pull out a negative 3, x squared plus 2x. So then I'll complete the square. So I get x squared, x and x. So I get x plus 1. It's 1. So I add 1 over here, but really a negative 3. So I'm really subtracting 3 on this side. So I get negative 15. Those are negative 3 groups of x plus 1 squared. So my final answer is y equals negative 3 x plus 1 squared plus 15. Problem 145, what's the period of sine of 2 pi times x? How do you know? So in order to find the period, you figure out, you do 2 pi over 2 pi because you want to know how many times. So that would equal 1. And the reason is because 2 pi divided by 2 pi is 1. Problem 146, Colleen and Jolie both use the calculators to find sine of 30 degrees. Colleen got sine of 30 degrees is negative 0.98880316241, but Jolene got the sine of 30 degrees is 0.5. Is one of their calculators broken or is something else going on? So Colleen used radian instead of putting her calculator in degrees. And problem 151 says consider the equation. So find f of x equals 3 of x plus 4 to the second minus 8. Find an equation such that f and x intersect only at one point. So I basically, for my equation, I said g of x was just going to be the negative, because what will happen if I reverse my parabola, they're going to just cross right at their vertex. So then it goes on to say, find an equation of the function of h of x such that f of x and h of x intersect at no points. So I basically just took my reflected parabola and I moved it down one. And now they won't cross at all. So I made h of x equal negative 3 x plus 4 squared minus 9. So now they would be 1 apart.